and managing to crash audio all over the place. So welcome yet again to Circus Rigging and Safety, and a slightly new setup for this time as we start to develop some more interesting visual solutions for you, whilst we're also trying to get on top of some of these interesting, tricky rigging problems podcast. What you can see on the screen in front of you videos and all of the other information that we put out for free for advice on safe rigging practice. And then on the other side, we also have a paid member service, and that's usually for people who appreciate what we do, want to contribute, or who want to join in part of the conversation. So there is a rigging forum at the back of this, which allows us to communicate together and to have lots of conversations about all of the things that we do. Okay, so you may want to check out the website, and that website itself, if you want to go and have a look at those sorts of elements, you'll be able to see quite all the different things that we've published there. So there's a couple of new things that have come up in the last week, and two of those we're going to be talking about in just a minute. Okay, so would you like to go on to the next scene? Okay. So, there's a variety of different things that we're going to be looking at today, but we're on YouTube, as you can see. So, if you're happy to send us comments, then we'll no doubt be able to see those as we go through. So please feel free to join the conversation. If you're happy getting this information out more widely to other people, then please like and subscribe. Okay, so let's go over what else we're going to be talking about during the rest of this particular broadcast. So, one of the things that we've been doing recently is having a lot of conversations on inspection, and last month we published an article and had a long conversation about inspections with Chris Higgs and Imogen Mitchell. So if you want to go back and have a look at that, you'll be able to see both of those, so you can go and have a look at the last month's live stream, and we're still going to be continuing a little bit in that vein, because this was very much about the law and inspections last time, and what we're looking for this time is taking a more practical approach to that, and we'll be providing a little bit more advice on that as we go forwards. But for this broadcast, what I'd like to do is to introduce to you first of all Chris Higgs, and for those of you who know him already from many of our other broadcasts, he's come to help us out with some of the other things that we want to be talking about today. So welcome, Chris.
Hi there, glad to be here.
Very, very glad to have you. So there's lots of reasons for bringing Chris into the conversation from here, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of those elements as we go on, because one of the biggest things, one of the largest sections of today that we're going to be looking at is rigging from truss. I had a lot of questions, and Chris was very helpful in filling me in on what some of those things are. But one of the first things that we're actually going to go and do is have a look at my cat, who clearly wants to be part of the picture. So let's move on to the next part of what we're going to do. So one of the first things that we've been doing more recently is looking at rigging training. So as far as rigging training goes, there's a wide variety of different courses which are suitable for rigging. Chris has come and give one of his presentations in our rigging conference that we had in October, and you can go back and check out that. It's on YouTube, it's freely available to everybody if you want to learn about the rigging in the entertainment industry course. One of the other ones we had a request for was coming and getting an interview with Bryan Donaldson. So when it comes to Bryan's very well known in the circus world for his rigging training course, and we wanted to find a little bit more about where it was positioned, who it was for. So we had a long chat with Bryan. We've written up a short article which we've just put out on the website today. There is a longer version of that full interview where Bryan and I are talking for about 45 minutes or so about his experience and history and how that's informed the sorts of training that he's doing. So what we've got to show you now is just a short snippet from that interview, which is more specifically about that rigging fundamentals training course. So let's play that.
Done, I don't know, like either some form of learning, or done a little bit of aerial, Students that have done, like I've had students that have completed like the degree at Circus of the National Centre of Circus Arts, or the intensive course that my aerial home does, and they're kind of ready now to go out into the world as an aerialist and market themselves and start getting gigs. That's when they turn around and say, right, before you do that, it'd be really good if you go and do this course, which is just, sort of like, we'll teach you about what you should be looking for if you're an aerialist and potentially going to be going into a variety of different venues, just to keep yourself, just some basic information that you need to know in advance, So that's kind of where I think that's what my personal opinion is that the course is best geared towards that sort of level.
Yeah.
People that are just maybe coming into the aerial business that want to get a little bit of knowledge to make themselves a bit safer.
No, that's very good. So the content, so the objectives of the course at the end of the day, how would you characterize what people are going to walk away with?
Right. The objectives in my mind are basically raising awareness.
Yeah.
I think. I don't claim that you can do my course and you'll be a rigger. It's not like an IPAF ticket. You go and do it and you've got a ticket, Yes, I give a certificate because I think it's important that people feel that they have, it's a certificate of completion and attendance of the course, so it's something tangible, especially if people are paying. It's nice for them to have something tangible,
Yeah, absolutely. Excellent.
If I feel that if I can raise the awareness of people to know when to ask a question, or if they are unsure about something, not to just assume. Sorry, what we talking? Oh, the objectives of the course.
Objectives, yeah.
So that's it. Basically, is I guess just to raise awareness of maybe even their own limitations, of people's own limitations, and to know when to sort of seek advice or to get a second opinion.
Thank you very much. So that's a small snippet of a longer interview which you can watch with Bryan Donaldson, which is available in the members area of our site. If you want to go and rewatch that again, or if you'd like to see the article about his training course, then anyone can see that from our website as well, circusrigging.info. So the next thing that I'd like to have a look at is last November, I was invited down by No Fit State Circus to take part in their rigging of their circus tent and their circus show luminosity. So one of the things that I'd like to show you now is part of that video. We'll be launching next week on the site. Let's have a look. So what we'd like to say about this as we're going into it is that we should be able to, hang on a second, we've got a slight technical hitch on this one. Let's go to there, and there. If you zoom in a little bit. So, with this video, what I did as being part of the rigging team, it was obviously difficult in some cases to be holding a camera and watching everything that was going on, whilst also doing a lot of the rigging work as well. But I have to say this was 2 weeks well spent in Wales, in the snow at sometimes, living in my van in a field in Wales. And this particular video shows the whole process from beginning to end of getting that tent off the ground. There's a section which we may well decide to produce later, which covers the rigging of the cupola of the tent. And there's quite a lot of detailed work in there that I managed to capture about a lot of the ways that they rig for circus inside that tent. What you're seeing here on this video is the methodology which is actually used to raise that tent in the first place. So hopefully that's of interest to you guys. I'll put that up on the website in the next week, and I'll put that out in a newsletter in the next week as well. So that video is well worth a watch if you want to see how it's done by the professionals, and it was a very great experience working with No Fit State. They are excellent at training people and giving people experience they need in all different sorts of roles in circus. So there's a couple of other elements that we're working on at the moment, as well as that No Fit State video. One of the things that we're producing at the moment, which we've been working on for the last couple of months, is a safe rigging of silks video. How to choose the right silks, how to maintain them, how to rig them, different knots, different pieces of equipment to use. and we'll be putting that out along with a aerial hammock video as well. So the next subject, and one of the main runs for Chris and I to be talking about today, has to do with a piece of education that we tried to put together at the beginning of the pandemic, and this was kind of put on hold for other things coming first. So let's just play that in the background and I can talk over part of that as we go along. So with different haircuts and a different venue on this particular video, so editing extra footage into there is always going to be interesting, so we'll see how that works. So the way that we've been working here is creating content, writing articles, recording videos, and then putting it out to our Riggers forum to actually get feedback on this sort of content. So building it in the first place and trying to go for high quality, good education is something that takes quite a lot of time. And Chris has been very fundamental in helping to steer that in a good direction, so that pedagogically it's of good quality, it's accessible to everybody, but also it's accurate. So this video, when we put it out, I had a number of comments coming back from different riggers, different experts, different people who do a lot of things with silks as well. So when I spoke to Chris, it was clear that we had a lot of talking to do about things which were either not quite correct in the video, because I had absorbed a lot of myth when it comes to rigging things off of truss. And of course, Chris is one of the experts on rigging that truss. So if you could go to the truss video. Now, this particular view of footage that we're looking at here, we set this up at Aerial Edge with a view of a lot of different bits of rigging in there, so that we could actually try a variety of different methods and then see exactly what Chris would actually have to say about them. But I've got a number of things that I want to start with, and hopefully these are good questions to ask. So let me just get a couple of them up in front of me. Now, one of the things that I brought up with when we were looking at connectors was the fact that we were talking about CE markings, and we wanted to make sure that all of our equipment had CE or UKCA markings. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding at the moment around UKCA, when we have to have it, who has to have it, whether we should throw away all of our CE equipment after January next year. Can't hear him. Hang on a second, we seem to have an audio problem coming in from Chris at the moment. So what's the stuff that's coming up on the screen? Chris, can you hear us? Oh, good, we got you back. Thank you. I'll come back and sit down again. Yeah, so what's the status of the UKCA mark relating to equipment? Yeah. Gotcha.
I seem like Chris is not, his audio is not going through. Should be audio. Loop back audio.
Okay. Okay. Hang on there, Chris. I'm just checking to see what the audio situation is here at the moment. Can you... Okay, we've got you back. That's good. Just checking for that. So could you summarise just that last sentence there, please?
I think it was probably quite a long sentence.
Let's go for it.
What the person buying the equipment needs to make sure that if they're buying it to use as part of their aerial equipment, although it's intended for PPE, it would now have a UKCA mark on it rather than the CE mark, but
Okay.
that is against the PPE directive. So if you're not using it for PPE, it kind of doesn't matter. And I think the point you made when you started the topic was that from the point of view of us in the UK, we need to make sure that we understand how we're using it.
Yep.
And whether it's the manufacturer's duty to put it on there and an employer's duty to put it into service.
Gotcha.
There are distinct roles to be considered. If you're putting it on the market, you've got duties to put CE marks on it, UKCA marks, etc.
Okay.
If you're an employer buying it to provide it to use in work,
Yeah.
then you need to make sure that it conforms to the relevant regulations.
Excellent. Just let me just check here that we're actually playing out okay. Are you are we hearing our audio out there in the world? Okay. So let's pause on that for a moment, please, Chris. I've just got to do a quick technical setup. So that's for Zoom. Okay, that's fine. So that's OSB audio, so he's hearing that one, so that's fine. It's where we're coming from here. I've got Zoom one, Zoom audio there, and that one coming in is coming from loopback audio, which is this one here, and that should be coming in from Zoom there. So that's got nothing coming back out on that one. Sorry, I'm just going to have to do a quick sort out of making sure that I've got your audio coming in, Chris, because we can't hear you at this stage, or at least that's the running applications, audio devices, Zoom audio device. Chris, could you say something?
I certainly could. I can hear you loud and clear at present.
Yeah, it's coming through into the system. It's not being looped back into the audio channel, which is now going out to YouTube. So apologies to everyone. We're just going to fix this live, and we'll hopefully have this sorted in a second or two. Okay, Chris, one more time, please.
Hello, hello, hello.
Perfect. Now we've got that working. Yep. So that. Speaker chat. So Chris, one more time, please.
Hello, hello, hello.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, that's going out there. That's good. So. Excellent. So, just to ask you questions on the UKCN. So, if I've already bought equipment, it's got CE markings on it. I'm assuming that I'm absolutely fine to continue using that.
Absolutely.
So there's no real difference there. So if I'm buying. My computer's jumping around.
Can you boost this audio?
Sorry?
Boost this audio.
I'll start leading on some of this and you can advise. I think it's going to come back in a second. So there's a few things which are jumping up and down here for some reason. That's too high, lower. Much lower. Yeah, that's better. Just getting a little bit of howl around now. So just trying to tweak that still a little bit. To be bringing up its own challenges, but we'll manage to get over those. So if I'm buying, if I've bought equipment, I can use it. If I'm going to buy it, and I'm seeing that it's got a CE mark on it, not a UKCA mark on it, is there any impact to that?
Not at the moment, no. And because it's a manufacturer's duty to make sure it's marked correctly, the theory being as of January coming, 2023, January the 1st, well actually December 31st, midnight,
Yeah.
it shouldn't be, difficult to phrase, it should be
Chris. I'm just going to change a couple of things just so that you're hearing the right things. It's definitely the wrong thing, Mark. Let's go back to there. This is unfortunate. Right. I think that should be good now. Okay. So you spoke about when it's PPE versus lifting equipment.
Yeah. So back in the good old days when we were in Europe, machinery or lifting equipment is covered by the Machinery Directive.
Yeah.
So if we are genuinely lifting people with the equipment that we're purchasing, you could refer to that as lifting equipment, and it should comply with the supply of machinery safety regs. Now, if you consider things like pulleys and carabiners as lifting equipment, it's a difficult one because they're normally going to be manufactured to a different set of standards because they're intended often, not always, but often, to be used in assemblies for PPE, for personal protective equipment, which we're not using it for.
Yeah.
You could also argue, for example, that a round sling, for the sake of argument, a span set, is manufactured as a piece of lifting equipment or lifting accessory, but the way you're using it to support your silks, for example, isn't doing any lifting at all. So what I think personally, and I guess there will be plenty more discussion in the future, is if you're using something that's appropriate now, then it'll be just as appropriate in the future. And it seems to me, certainly from what I learned from HSE and others, is that until Europe and the UK diverge, is the word they're starting to use now, at present, pretty much everything that would have been used to CE mark something is also used to UKCA mark something.
Yeah.
So it really isn't going to make any difference at the moment. But if we as a nation decide to implement something new that the Europeans UK requirements.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, so I mean, some of that is around what is. So there's terminology that we've been talking around for a little while, and some of that is things which are intended for lifting. And I think I've had a lot of conversations where I'm talking about industrial equipment versus PPE, or Lola equipment versus climbing equipment, and other things like that. And I think that based on what we've been looking at with regards to inspections, if we're using it for lifting, then it's we're considering that as equipment which is intended for lifting, so then we would apply Lola to it, whether it's originally manufactured for PPE or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So
I suspect from a legal perspective, it will only ever sort of crystallize if there's some case law, which we obviously, none of us want things to get to the stage where there's any case law about anything like that. But if you're using it for an appropriate application, then I think that the common sense mantra must be just be sensible. Everything in the entertainment industry, we represent such a small market to the people that make things like shackles, for example, that we're always going to be borrowing from other applications.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. All sorts of areas that we're bringing stuff in for in circus, not just sort of industry and PPE, but the scaffolding industry, all sorts of other areas for some of the different shows and gigs and different things we're trying to achieve.
Absolutely. I think a thing that you and I have certainly talked about previously on these things, it is worth bearing in mind that the Machinery Directive or the supply of machinery safety regs for us post-Brexit, specifically excludes equipment that's used for moving, I think was the word. You could include study. I'm sure you can include rehearsal, but whether you can include training, I'm not sure. Anything that we use for moving a person, not having a person hanging, but for moving a person, in other words, lifting them, swinging them, is exempt from the Machinery Directive and therefore the supply of machinery safety regs. So it wouldn't have had to have a CE mark anyway. Neither would it have to have a UKCA mark. So if you think of the trapeze that's just coming into shot at the moment, that would never have had a CE mark.
No.
Neither would it need a UKCA mark, because it's definitely not lifting anybody when it's hung statically on a truss.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. So we can see on that truss there's been a variety of methods of hanging it on there. Now, one of the questions that I had for you, or one of the things that you picked up, was that the way that I was approaching rigging things from truss was always to encapsulate the truss and rig from the top of the truss, so it was keeping it in compression rather than rigging it potentially from the bottom of the truss. And we had a good conversation about what was probably a better way of thinking about that.
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is the loads that are likely to be generated in the, let's call it the studio environment, perhaps, rather than the performance environment, because that might be a little more dynamic, shall we say. But with the photo that's in shot at present, the kind of loads that you're going to put on that particular truss wouldn't worry it in the slightest wherever you hung it from.
Yeah.
You really wouldn't. The most important thing to consider in that sort of situation is the length of the truss, the span between the supports, and whether you're going to be twisting it in any way. That's probably the most important thing. And that's making some other assumptions, the assumptions being that supports are strong enough and it's all connected together correctly and assembled correctly.
Yeah, indeed. So, I mean, I don't think any of that... So I think one of the points that you made was that you could rig it from the top or the bottom, as long as you were rigging it near a node. Yeah,
applying the load at a node point is important. I mean, the truss that you've got in shot there, I think, is actually a Total Fabs one, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
So the point load, as far away from a node as you can get, the base of the triangles that you can see, the vertical triangles that you can see, is going to be something like 6 kilonewtons. So it really isn't going to worry the truss, really, whatever you do to it. I think the myth about going from the top chord to the bottom chord, again, it's very dependent on what the load is. And I suspect whoever it was that provided the explanation that ended up hitting so many people's ears may well have been a very different sort of loading situation. So in many respects, everything needs to be examined on its merits or demerits, so that you've got the right answer to the right question. I mean, unfortunately, a lot of people don't want to hear, because for them it's part of their job, not their job. So they want to get it done, they want to know it's good, they want to know it's correct. And there are a number of methods you can use so that you cover all those bases. I always, I suppose, distill it to 3 basic principles. The first being, is it captive? Which it clearly is if it passes through the truss, so it can't slip off, which is just as relevant in this application as it is if you were lifting the truss with the sling, as opposed to suspending something with it. The second would be to consider the stability. So if you're suspending it, whether it's the control you can exercise over the truss, its center of gravity, the way it wants to hang, and so forth. But in this application, because it's stood up on a tabletop, if you want to call it that, with 4 legs, a lot of that is taken care of, unless the truss is a particularly long span, in which case you do run the risk of twisting. There's also the point to mention there that if you've got one trapeze hung pretty much wherever it is, but even if it was in the middle, which is kind of the worst place in some respects, is it just one trapeze, or have you got 5 students all hanging the same way off the same cord of the truss, the same tube of the truss? And then the last one is the sling doing anything to the truss that is deleterious, or is the truss doing anything to the sling? Now, if you're thinking about whether the truss is doing anything to the sling, I guess in the aerial sense, it's probably going to be some sort of abrasion to the sling. Can it move? So a good way to prevent that is to put wraps around the cords so that it can't move. Even then, you're going to have to pay attention to it in time. On the other side of the coin, what's the sling doing to the truss? It's unlikely that you're going to be doing too much damage in terms of compression with the way that the sling pushes into the truss, the resultant forces it creates, and that sort of thing. But as I said before, it is possible that you will damage the truss if you use sort of leverage involved. So that's definitely worth considering, particularly on the lighter weight trusses. The truss that we're talking about that you can see in the video there, that's a pretty serious, coin a phrase, it is a serious light duty truss. That's its brand name. So it does have some fairly serious load bearing capacity. If you apply the same principles to a much lighter truss, of which there are so many these days, and they're normally braced on 4 sides, but they're made of much thinner wall tubes. They're designed for a very specific load case, and all that information can be gleaned from the manufacturer. That's probably the most important thing to do, is to make sure you've got access to the information. So you need to identify the truss, and it's very easy to think you're looking at a brand because it fits another brand. You kind of think they're the same thing. They might not be. Really important to make sure you're using one brand interconnecting with another, and to identify it, because several manufacturers produce a 30 centimeter truss in 2, if not 3 different, what should we say, duties, weights, and they all have different capabilities.
Yeah, indeed. So if I wanted to make sure for the piece of truss that I've got, and the truss is rated for the length that I've got, let's say it's got a centre point load of a ton, stated on there, could I hang from a single cord of that truss, providing I'm within that working load limit?
Again, the answer is you don't want to hear. It depends. I guess if it's a truss of the sort of the size and type that you mentioned, so it's rated capacity to carry a ton in the middle, the assumption would be that that is a load that is applied across both ladders, so you're loading them evenly. Most of the European manufacturers would quote a reduction factor if you're working off one side, be it 1 or 2 cords, but you apply the load at a node point, and if it was one of our products, you put it on one side, then you multiply by 0.4.
Gotcha.
So it's a bit under half the capacity quoted. So that 1 ton now, let's say, is 400 kilos, 4 kilonewtons. And because it's quoted as a 1 ton truss, I think it's probably quite likely that you could actually hang that on 1 cord, yes. But it should be near a node point. But it'll only be once.
I
That's the point. And a lot of, now there's a standard for the design and manufacture of them in Europe. A lot of people may look at that and think they can hang that 6 kilonewtons I mentioned earlier for that particular truss in every single bay, within every single triangle. And that absolutely is not the case. That 6 kilonewtons is once. Anywhere on the truss, but only once.
Yeah, indeed. So you would tend to at least hang it evenly. So if it was hanging off the two, if it was hanging just off the bottom of the truss, you'd hang it across the 2 bottom cords to get the full rating, but preferably near a node.
Yes, get as near as a node as you can, and even I would say go as far as to say don't put the fan set, in this case the round sling, through the node, so that you're actually in the V, because if there was a significant load on a lighter gauge truss than the one we're looking at the moment, you could easily bend the braces, and that's a really bad idea. Never apply any lateral forces to a diagonal or vertical brace. That's what they're there for, is to create the strength between the 2 cords. So if you push one inwards or outwards, it's almost like taking the prop off your washing line. You'll start to create a weak spot further along. Now, I think the thing that confuses people, and it's completely understandable, if I hang all my my tricks off the bottom cords by rigging a sling as a triangle bit off the bottom, but I'm suspending it from the top, I'm going to try and pull the truss apart. Well, that's true, but some of them, the welds on some of the braces are already in tension, so that they're all the truss condition, for obvious reasons. You're not going to rate it in its strongest condition. Therefore, that tension is already taken into account, so you're not going to pull it apart. Highly unlikely, and especially unlikely with the types of loads that we're talking about.
Indeed. Good. So if I wanted to know more about that, if I wasn't certain, what's my best way of finding out? see some questions. Can you hear us now, Chris?
I can hear you.
Excellent. Sorry, I can hear you back now. Again, thank you very much. Just picking up the set of questions which are coming back in from here, and I think they're going to be some traditional ones. I've got... Yep, sorry. This will be recorded and it does keep dropping out, so I'm apologising for that. There's something happening with our Zoom connection and the audio drivers for that are playing around just a little bit. So this one is to Noah. What's the design factor for Europe? It says in the US it's 1.8 or more because of the aluminium design code. I think that there's an answer to that when it comes to Truss that we were given as part of the rigging conference, but I'll let Chris answer that separate in just a second. And Ian Hall came on and spoke about design factors for Truss. So we do have a whole video on Truss design from last October's rigging conference. But Chris, I don't know if you have a comment on that.
Well, the easy, quick, and possibly slightly glib response. So sorry, was it Noah?
Yeah, no.
Noah. Apologies, it's not meant to sound like this, but why do you need to know? So long as you stick within the load tables, it ain't a problem, and you use the truss in accordance with the operating manual. Because lifting equipment might be rated against failure, you're not going to do that with a beam or whatever. And I think your reference to the code obviously shows me or tells me that you know something about this. We have a Euro code, which I guess is the equivalent that we use over here. So there is a factor, but it wouldn't be applied to the, as it were, the finished product. It'll be part of the calculations for the structural use of aluminium. And I guess because aluminium 6082 or the equivalent is going to be the same the world over, I would imagine the code that you would use in the States is going to be very, very similar.
Very good. Okay, thank you, Chris.
If you want to reduce it to a factor.
Yeah. Cool. Hopefully that answers the question. Yeah, that's good. So let's move on a little bit from there. We've got some interesting sling configurations hanging on that truss for a variety of different reasons. Any thoughts as to any of those that you could see that were earlier on in the video? Do you want to switch back to that part of the video?
Yeah, I was going to say I can't recall all of it. There were a couple where it looked to me as if there was a cord lease or a climb-up rope or something just hanging. Yeah. You can't quite see it over the top cords, but it didn't look as if there was a wrap to me. It looked like it just went straight over.
Probably so.
Which in itself is not an issue at all. But if you would, I would imagine if you're certainly on a trapeze bar, for example, you'd probably want it to stay in the middle of the, well, we want it to stay in the middle of the truss as riggers. So we load the ladders evenly. Yes, there we go. You can see it just passes straight over.
Yeah, if you
misses the diagonals, which is great on the top of the trapeze rope.
Yeah.
But I personally would go to one side of there and put a wrap on at least one of the cords,
yeah,
be it top or bottom.
There we go.
Okay, because it mirrors, doesn't it? I think.
Yeah.
Oh no, to the left as you look at it as well. I'm now looking at it on YouTube. There are a number of wraps on the sling that's holding the little twin pulley up.
Yep.
So if you follow that up, you'll see there's a bite choke,
yep,
which isn't actually deviating the straight line so much. It's probably not doing a great job.
Back in and wait for Zoom to sync back up again.
Low by the look of it.
Work a little harder. This is not usually a problem we've had with
the probably not applying a load in a particular.
Sorry, Chris. Audio issues. That's just dropped us out for a little bit. We'll revisit this again. So, sorry, you were talking about that choking of that sling. And
yes,
and whether that was good
choke,
or bad.
you can't see my cursor, of course. If you from the twin pulley there, if you head up the sling towards the truss, it passes through a bight which comes from the other side. So that would, under normal circumstances, be a choke. But because the standing part with the carabiner at the end is pretty much straight, then it's not going to weaken the sling particularly. But what it will do, because there's a wrap at the top, it will apply the load to the weakest part of the truss. Because it's directly above a node where there is no support on that free span, if you want to call it that. But for the loads we're talking about, it's probably irrelevant. So it's all a question of looking at the bigger picture, really. If it is a significant load, and you could say that perhaps doubles trapeze, if people were doing, I don't know, catches drops or something, so that you get a bit of a shock load on it, then on a lighter weight truss, you could actually do some significant damage to it if it's not applied at a node point, or as close as you can get. But again, without putting any lateral loads onto the diagonals.
Yeah, very good. So one of the things that comes up when we try and run pulley systems and slings together, if we're going across the top of the truss and coming down, if you like, in a triangle, then one of the reasons for using that sort of choke arrangement is that we want to put it into a pulley. So we want to have it hitting the correct angle, because if we end up using a bow shackle, so we have three-way loading on it, and then we can't always fit a pulley in underneath. So we need to put a second connector in instead to make it the pulley face the correct angle. Do you have any thoughts or feedback on that?
I mean, effectively, that's what riggers do the world over, isn't it? It's arranging a bridle so that you've got it holding the whatever the piece of equipment is in the right place. I think it's ingenuity as much as anything else, isn't it? I think it's all determined by the kind of loads that you're dealing with. And in that case there, I'm assuming that is there not as a lunge line, as it were. It is there to swag stuff out of the way, to page it out of the way. In which case the loads involved are going to be minute, and you really don't need to worry about it too much.
Yeah, well, in fact, I think like a lot of the ones that are up there's some of them are being used. In fact, I think everything that you can see there is actually being either used as a lunge line or for suspending equipment. So I don't know whether you want to consider a lunge line lifting equipment in this particular case.
I would, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. In fact, funnily enough, with this in mind, I was having a quick look through some of the gymnastic equipment manufacturer websites that I could find yesterday, and looking to see if they were using any particular standards or referencing CE marks or whatever else. Not a thing, which I guess is probably a comfort to many.
Yes, that's good. So I'm just checking out the comments as they were coming in to make sure.
Yeah, funny enough, I just looked at Noah's. He was saying no, it doesn't cover the question he asked. He was asking for overall design needs. I don't. Is he designing trusses? I don't know. If he is, then you've got to use the code that's, I wouldn't say a legal requirement, but use the code that you would have to. What I think is known in the US as the authority having jurisdiction, whatever they require. So for us, it would need to comply with Eurocode 9, but it will be different in the States. But that's really one for structural engineers, I would suggest, and certainly if you're thinking of making your own trusses, because I don't understand otherwise why you'd need the overall design needs. The reason we don't publicize ours is because we don't want people thinking, oh yeah, but you know, if it's rated at 3:1, we can put double what it says in the catalogue, because you will. We know you will. So we keep it to ourselves. You just stick to the load tables, and that should give you everything you need.
Yeah, I think from the perspective when I'm looking at it, if I'm looking at working load limits on lots of equipment, that's built around the machinery directive for lifting. Whereas when it comes, and then for that we have to adapt that because it's then for human loads. So we need to know what that design factor is to work it out. And I suspect Truss that's not the case.
Yeah, well, it'll be the supply of machinery safety regs now for us. I'm not quite sure how that plays out in the States, but if you know what you're lifting and you're within the allowable load for the truss, it shouldn't make any difference what you're lifting.
Yeah.
because it's still a force. This is the difficulty that we have with trying to use lifting equipment methodologies with lifting people.
Yeah. I was just sort of looking back at the operation lifting equipment regulations of halving your factors of safety or doubling them.
If the equipment isn't designed for lifting people.
Yeah. Whereas would we say that Truss is?
No.
Excellent.
But is it appropriate? Is it? Yes.
Yeah.
Is it used the world over for that? Yes. Does it fall apart on a regular basis when it's being correctly installed? No. Entirely appropriate. It's a force. I mean, it's a bit like, I would imagine, I'm guessing here, but it's a bit like aircraft, I would imagine. Has that got a design factor? I'm sure it has, but what possible benefit is that to anybody to know unless they make aircraft themselves?
Yeah.
Or they want to copy it. I think what you need to do is to identify the need that you have of the piece of equipment, Truss or any other, and speak to the manufacturers.
Gotcha. Cool.
Ask them. I mean, it's something that perhaps isn't done enough. Don't be frightened of speaking to the manufacturers. Sometimes there might be a cost. Sometimes we might be duty bound to give you all the information you need.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's certainly the law in the UK. As a manufacturer, if you're providing a piece of equipment for sale, your design information and everything else has to be available to the people using it, where that's appropriate. You don't have to give them all your trade secrets, but at the same time, it's Section 6 of the Health and Safety at Work Act for us means that you've got to supply full user information. And if you say, for example, as we do with trusses, not that it's really relevant to aerial work, but in terms of fall arrest, for example, we haven't taken any account in our structural calculations of the forces generated by fall arrest. It's not to say you can't do it, but we haven't done it. You need to do the maths. And I'm sure in the same way, if you purchase truss from us or any reputable manufacturer, you'll get a structural report so that your engineers can decide whether it's appropriate or not. And that comes as part of the price of the product. Maybe that's what Noah was interested in. You'd have to read the structural report for the truss concerned to find out the design factor, I think he called it.
Yeah. I mean, so we've like aerial edges truss is from Total. So having had that in the first place, and the report not just of the truss itself, but the design of and all the factors, and that is quite a detailed piece of information for that.
Yeah, it's written by engineers for engineers. We'd supply you with the cross-sectional information. You'd apply the code that's relevant.
Yeah. And I think that the bits that's been interesting for me is when I'm hiring truss for other events from local truss suppliers, then all of that design work and all of the calculations and load tests and all of the other sorts of things that went into the stuff that we would have picked up from Total, that duty is now on me as far as making sure I'm safely designing it for the loads, and I can look at what a span can take for the particular lengths that I'm talking about, but as to whether it's an appropriate design, I think then I'm holding the bag for that one.
Absolutely. And I think if you do have a rough idea, and it will only ever be rough, I guess, of the kind of forces that you're generating that you need to support, and you compare that with the load tables that the manufacturer provides, I'm sure they'd be perfectly adequate for the vast majority of sort of everyday aerial activity. If you haven't got that information, then you need to get hold of it, or you can't do it.
Yeah,
that's the way it would work here. We frequently work with people to provide them information which is perhaps not as obvious as it should be, or information that we really wouldn't be expected to provide. And yes, sometimes there's going to be a fee for that, unfortunately. Or unfortunately for the customer, obviously. I'm sure we don't make any money on it. It's the engineers who, that's how they earn their corn. But again, it depends where you are in the world. Different requirements may exist. You might have to have it stamped by an engineer in one state that you wouldn't have to have done in another state. It depends. We don't work like that here. there are things that we have to do.
Yeah, very good. Good. So if anyone has any more questions about truss and rigging off of truss and connectors for truss and slinging off of truss, then put them into the live stream, or if you're watching this afterwards, just send them through to us and we'll add those into the comments, and we'll try and see what we can do to moving towards answering those sorts of questions. Chris, is there anything else you'd like to discuss or bring up at the moment as part of this?
I think most of it we've probably covered in some way.
I think so.
Certainly, yeah, all the notes I've got, I think we've covered. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. So I mean, it's certainly helping with producing the ultimate video on this, which is what we're often aiming to do. So we'll sit down at this end and decide whether the number of comments that come back, it's just easier to rewrite the script and record it all from scratch, or whether we can actually continue to edit what we've had in the past and just leave, historic haircuts in show. Good. So let's move on a little bit from here for what's coming up next. So we did a bunch of stuff on inspections before, and one of the things that we wanted to do for the next live stream was to actually do a live inspection. And in fact, if you can bring Chris back in view for this one, because he's obviously going to have some say as part of this particular process, is one of the things that Chris was discussing with me for last time was actually doing a live stream whilst inspecting different people's equipment. So we'll bring potentially a bunch of other people in there, because we were looking at inspections and how to improve inspections. So Chris, tell us a little bit of what your thoughts are with regards to that. If we were to do a live stream, bringing different people in, bringing their equipment in, and then doing an inspection during the live stream, what are your thoughts?
It really just sprang from experience. I'm very much hands-on. I don't really like the sort of theory presentations and death by PowerPoint and all that. I'd much rather get out in the warehouse and start pulling slings out and looking at them, and if possible, taking them apart. The minute you find one that's damaged that you're going to condemn, then dissect it, find out what else is going on inside it, get familiar. Yesterday, showing people the inside of a polyester round sling and the steel wire rope equivalent, they're absolutely amazed as to how little there is going on inside and how easy it is to inspect them, particularly when you refer or compare it with the cost of purchase, compared to the risks that potentially we take with them. So it's really a no-brainer. However, the skill is being able to look at it and say, no, it is safe to use, even though you might bring it to me and anybody else saying, oh, I'm not too happy about this. You just need to know the basic criteria to apply. And given that we're really talking probably, I guess, working from the top down, inspecting trusses for damage, how much you can get away with, if you like, carabiners and shackles, myons, swivels, polyester slings, and then I guess it's down to the trick, so to speak. There's got rigging plates as well. Then it's probably down to the trick, and looking at fibre ropes, be they artificial or natural. And then probably competencies beyond mine, actually, to look at the actual wear and tear that you find on any padding, or I used to use velvet, but whatever people use around splices and that kind of thing, because that competence to know what is okay and what isn't okay, by definition, is going to be gained through experience. You can talk to all the manufacturers you like about their products, and they'll tell you everything you need to know, but they are not necessarily familiar with what you're talking about, and very often they don't have time or even the interest necessarily to actually sit down and say, oh, okay, well, if you're using it like that, be aware of this, that, and the other. So that will come very much, in my opinion and experience, from the user, not from people who make the basic bar of a trapeze, if you like, the people that actually splice the cotton rope around the thimble that's welded to the bar, that the pin to the bar, whatever method's used, because you can't see it from the outside. Much the same with a round sling. If you know what's going on inside, and with a bit of luck, as I say, getting back to the question, if we have got, I don't know, 4 pairs of hands dotted around 4 screens, and somebody does find a nick and you can see the white fibers showing through, then let's make sure everybody's equipped with a pair of scissors and they can actually snip all the way around the sheath and pull it apart and see what surrounding damage there might or might not be. And then ultimately, the masking tape that holds the ends together. That's the thing that normally shocks people. So I think you can probably derive a fair amount of confidence from inspecting gear as well.
Yeah, indeed. So that sounds a great invitation. At the moment, we've got that scheduled for the last Friday in May at 4 p.m. British Summer Time, same as this one, last Friday of the month. So if there are people out there who'd like to participate in that, or if you've got people who've got some interesting equipment to inspect, then please drop me a line and we'll take that forwards from there. So I want to thank Chris for his participation in this, and also his participation in a lot of the output and sanity checking that we're doing along the way. So thank you very much.
Yeah, always happy to help.
This is good. So those who are interested in coming and doing that one for the future, that will be good. And just drop us a line and we'll have a discussion about your participation in that, and the more interesting the better. But then I guess there's a lot of commonly held things that we could do as well, just standard equipment that you're not sure about or just want to learn more about inspections. Then come along and participate in our next live stream. Thanks to everyone for listening, and thanks for all of your patience with regards to the audio dropping out. We've obviously got a bit of work to do technically at this end, because we've not had exactly that problem before. We usually have a couple of teething issues in the first couple of minutes, but this one has been a little bit more persistent, and so thanks to everyone on the way through from there. So other than that,